Hey everyone, welcome to the Fan Lab, a limited series podcast that dives deep into the heartbeat of contemporary culture and commerce. I'm your host, Jonathan Hansen, the Chief Creative Officer of Unconquered, a creative agency unlocking the emotional power of fandom for brands. We created this podcast as an extension to a report we recently published called Decoding Fandom that's available on our website at weareunconquered.co or linked in the show notes. From the world of music and entertainment to the realm of business valuations and technology, fandom has become one of the most powerful forces in brand building over the past few years. We've seen it transform brands through our work in sports, athletic apparel, and footwear, and we can see it across culture, showing up in people lining up for Monster Energy tattoos to influencer-led brands like Prime Energy. Being a fan can be a profound connection that sparks the need to belong to something larger than ourselves, while also giving us a chance to embrace our own unique individuality. In this series, we talk with experts in contemporary culture and fandoms, exploring it from every angle. We hope to shed light on how brands can work within fandom as a marketing tool through insightful discussions on how brands can create lifelong connections with their audience. In our latest episode, we take a look at the growth of Glossier with Elizabeth Affuso, who's a professor of media studies with a focus on fashion and beauty cultures, as well as the shifting dynamics of celebrity and influencer economies. She published a case study, Into the Flow, examining how Glossier leveraged fandom. If you're not familiar with the brand, it's a beauty brand that's gone from blog to D2C to being stocked in national retailers. Through a series of pivotal moments, strategic branding, and influencer partnerships, Glossier has successfully built a dedicated fandom around its products. Join us as we explore the key factors that contributed to Glossier's rise to success and examine how they harness the power of fandom to build their brand. Well, Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, of course. So I had a chance to speak with Avi. He really recommended you as far as being a great resource to speak with. I know you've done some research in the past together, both work in academia. I would love to get a little background on how you two met and how this sort of has helped, I think, your focus within the world of fandom.
Sure. Avi and I don't know quite when Avi and I met, but we met certainly at a conference, probably about 10 years ago now. And, at that time, I would say my work was pivoting into the fandom kind of sector. I had always been interested in fashion and beauty cultures, in branding. I'd done some work on reality TV, specifically on The Hills, which I think we'll probably talk about later in this episode. And I'd been interested in the ways that the new celebrity economies were, the influencer economy, the reality TV economy, were, kind of shifting celebrity and shifting its relationship to products, to merchandise. And I was specifically interested myself in the fashion and beauty sectors. And Avi and I were both interested, I think, in the way that fandom was being embraced by industry, both by the media industry, but also by the fashion and beauty industries, various other sectors of commerce, and the ways that branding and fandom were kind of intersecting into these sort of brandoms, which I think Glossier is an example of a brandom, and we can talk about that later. And we were also interested in the ways that fan studies, which is this subfield of media studies, had historically been kind of uninterested in, or maybe not uninterested is maybe not the right word, but less interested in branded product than in things that were fan made, right? There was this conception in the field that there was maybe more authenticity attached to products that were fan made, like fan videos or fan art or fan fiction. And there was, interest in collecting of branded items like comic books or action figures or things like that. But there was sort of less interest in the commodity product that was being made by corporations to sell to fans. And we were really interested in kind of diving into that sector and thinking about what the implications there were, both for fans, but also for merchandising writ large, and what it might say about our kind of contemporary moment in like late capitalism, for example, in this sort of very consumer centric and consumer driven moment that we live in, that is very global. And that's really how we came together. And we started working together on this special journal issue on films and merchandise, which came out in 2018. And now we're working on a new project that's on kind of fan lifestyles and how this idea of lifestyle is being kind of leveraged into the fan space. And lifestyle is a sort of buzzy term, I think, in the contemporary economy. So we're really thinking about trying to define what that might look like within the fan space.
And in 2018, referencing that piece you wrote on Glossier, Into the Glow, Glossier's Emily Weiss and millennial entrepreneurism. I think you sent that over and I read it before we started chatting today, and I thought it was a great piece, and I think it does a great job of really bundling up everything you've already been talking about as far as like entertainment properties, celebrityism. And then you have the whole beauty and fashion influencers. And what I always find the beauty in fashion influencer space really interesting when you compare it to like sports and athletics or entertainment properties. There is something distinctly different, but I'm still at this point in my understanding and depth of it and study. It's still hard to like pinpoint and clearly define, which I think is really, for me anyway. And I'm really curious, as you were thinking about this brand and all these things at the same time, like what it was specifically that pulled you in and inspired you to write about this in depth as you did, and really start breaking it down and looking at maybe either cause and effect, or this is how it worked in a brand strategy perspective.
Sure. I mean, I came to the brand, to Glossier, via Into the Gloss, which was this blog that Emily Weiss started in 2010. That was sort of massively influential beauty blog. And I think a lot of people who came to Glossier at the point of its launch in 2014 came to it via that sort of trajectory, right? It was this natural extension. The brand, in fact, was like launched and announced on the web, on the blog, and then linked over to the sort of new Glossier page. And so it was this, it was certainly, the indication was certainly that the initial fan base would be people who were already embroiled in the brand and who, were familiar with its content. I think that's not true anymore. I mean, certainly like when I go to the Sephora gondola, as they call them in Sephora, for Glossier, there's a lot of preteens buying Glossier products who were not reading the blog in 2010. I mean, because they were like small children. So it's definitely expanded its landscape quite considerably. And I think my initial interest Into the Gloss specifically came from a larger interest in what was happening in beauty culture on the internet. Across a bunch of different spaces, notably YouTube and the blogosphere. And I was quite interested in how, beauty kind of makeover culture was exploding in these spaces. And I was interested in it for a couple of reasons. One, I was interested in the ways that it seemed to be more inclusive than beauty magazines had been in the past. So there were a lot of influencers coming up in the space who were more sort of body diverse than we'd seen previously. And I was interested in the fact that that was happening, but also that makeup was still being shilled, right? So it wasn't like we were rejecting the makeup and beauty industries. We were embracing them, but thinking about them more expansively, which is a kind of key argument of a lot of post-feminist discourse and literature. And I think I quote Marcellus Kearney in that piece you were referencing on that. And I was also interested in the intimacy of initially the videos, and then also the top shelf routines that became the sort of centerpiece of Into the Gloss. So the top shelf was this column where they would interview somebody about their beauty routine. And it was a really sort of candid narrative. So instead of, these weren't unusual in beauty magazines like Allure or Vogue or Elle or things like that, but they were much more sort of edited in those contexts. These were these sort of like blogosphere style, like long form pieces where people would, describe in great detail the sort of bizarre ways that they, put on their product or their nighttime routine. Like I remember there was one with Liv Tyler where she said she like put perfume in her belly button, and that tip sort of went viral. And it didn't really seem like the kind of thing that would, like come, exist in a different space. It had this sort of intimacy about it. And it had this very sort of like quotidian quality that made these very compelling. And then there was, of course, because it was a blog, there were these massive comments that would exist, about hundreds of comments on these pieces where people would endorse a product that somebody was using, or they would, talk about something that they'd said about their routine. And it had this real community space aspect to it, which was also true for a lot of the YouTube vloggers as well. And so I became interested in how the internet was sort of embracing beauty culture. And this was simultaneous with something else that was happening that was really important, which was that, the iPhone comes out in 2007. Social media really starts to explode. The visual social media like Instagram starts to explode, kind of after Into the Gloss gets founded in 2010. And suddenly we have all these more, additional opportunities to be photographed than we had previously, which puts a lot more pressure on the sort of beautification of self. And one of the things that Into the Gloss was shilling in, that ultimately Glossier was shilling in their first 4 products, was this idea that you wanted your skin to be beautiful, that you wanted to have this sort of natural, glowy glow, of course, was like the big idea of Glossier. And it was one that was also very prevalent on the internet and the sort of YouTube spaces as well. And that you wanted, to look sort of natural, and you wanted to be you. This is Glossier's like big buzz sort of term is like you. And this felt like a kind of shift point in what the makeup industry had been selling. So it's sort of simultaneously the sort of rise of skincare product, which comes as part of, so partially as part of the Korean wave with Korean 10-step skincare routines. And then, comes in with this sort of focus on serums and skin perfecting products. And when Glossier launches in 2014, they do it with 4 products. One is like a lip balm, balm.com. It's like sometimes flavored, sometimes a little tinted, depending which one you buy. A perfecting skin tint, which was kind of like a tinted skin product. It's actually quite gender neutral. So that was the sort of interesting element of it. A priming moisturizer, and then a facial mist, of sort of toning facial mist product. It's actually, that's the only product of the original 4 that's now discontinued. But it was a very streamlined launch, and it was a kind of capsule of 4 products that, you could use and your skin would look great and you would look a little bit glowy and you would look fabulous. And, these like new Instagram pictures that could be taken at all times. And it felt quite innovative. And that was really what I was interested in initially. And then sort of diving back to the fandom elements, I was interested in the way that the brand leveraged fandom, not just fandom of the influencers or the celebrities who were being featured on the blog, or of Emily Weiss herself, but of the brand. So, it had this sort of very chic millennial pink branding.
Very minimal.
Pantone.
Yeah, exactly. It's
like
very
minimal. Pantone calls it rose quartz.
Yeah, it's like the cutout for like D2C branding, I would say, at least in the beginning. I know they were kind of earlier in the whole D2C market boom. So they definitely, I think, helped probably influence that trend. But they were definitely one of the first to really latch onto like that minimalist label and look.
Super minimalist label. And they when they would send you, I think there's a picture of the box and the article that I sent you, but when you would get an item from them, it would come in this sort of beautiful box. You'd open it up and it had this sort of messaging inside the lid. And then you got this pink bubble wrap pouch, zippable pouch that was reusable, and the products were inside of it. So rather than being in, like just thrown in the box, it had this presentation. And initially they gave out phone stickers in a slip of stickers. And now they give out a bigger sticker, and it's seasonal, that would go on like a water bottle or a laptop, thinking about the evolution of the sticker economy as well. But, again, this opportunity for the audience to actually do advertising and do branding for you by branding, their devices or their objects. And at that same time, when they launched the brand, they did this pop-up in New York. And I went to the pop-up on Lafayette Street. It's like down the street from the Supreme store, right in kind of Streetwear Central. And there was like a queue of people, around the block trying to get in. And it felt like it had this similarity to what the streetwear brands were sort of doing, right? Where it was like you're dropping product and everyone's going to queue up for it. And it's going to be this social, this kind of social moment. And then the stores were highly, highly Instagrammable in a way that stores were kind of not yet. I think they are now, but at that time, they weren't. They have they're famous for these mirrors. They're also in the Sephora end caps that are round and say you look good on them. So when you photograph yourself in the mirror, it says you look good, right? And then that was you see all over social media pictures of people in the store, showing images of themselves in the mirror. It had this real sense. It was clear from the beginning that they had a real sense of the sort of the circuitry of, the brand as a digital first, direct e-commerce brand, and the ways in which they could leverage that toward content creation, both from people they were in a relationship with, like more professional influencers, but also just from regular kind of consumers, or in this case, I might call them fans.
Totally. And I'm curious to if you think, when you think back on it, what were some of those like pivotal, big fan-centric moments? You talk one about, their early feature on the Hills. And, I'm always curious about when you think about like a business or a brand's story and trajectory, like what are those pivotal moments that help like really throw them into the stratosphere? And I wonder if that's one of those moments when you get an endorsement like that from people who have a really hot TV show on MTV and are speaking exactly to your specific audience. That's like prime time opportunity. What are your thoughts there?
So that's an interesting kind of thing. So Emily Weiss appeared on three episodes of The Hills in 2007, as sort of so she's the founder of Into the Gloss and Glossier, and she at that time was a college student at NYU, and she was Vogue's New York intern, and she comes out to LA, and she's like the intern extraordinaire, right?
This is like the beginning of a movie. I feel like this is like
the beginning of a movie. She's so good at her job. Yeah, she's so good at her job. This is like the first act of the story, right? So she's like so good at her job. She looks so pulled together. Nobody can even believe she's like a college student. And she, she's there as a kind of rival for Lauren Conrad's, and Whitney Port's LA interns who are like less pulled together, less good at their job, less effortlessly chic. So they sort of rivalry exists. At this point, she doesn't have any other, existing brand presence, right? This is 3 years before Into the Gloss. This is 7 years before Glossier. But she makes an impression. And the show is hugely successful, right? Like The Hills is a really, really big show, particularly with the people who would ultimately become kind of the Glossier core audience, if you will. And I think actually what's interesting when you go back and watch those episodes, as I have, subsequent to the launch of Glossier, for example, is she really has the brand identity down already. I mean, she has a much sort of cleaner, less made up look than the LA girls. She has that sort of effortless you quality that Glossier really kind of goes for. And I mean, there's always been this rumor that she was offered a bigger part on the City, the spinoff, of The Hills that was set in New York, and turned it down because she thought reality TV was like not where she wanted her brand to go. I've never been able to confirm that one way or the other, but that's always been sort of this background story. MTV will never confirm anything, so you'll never get an answer out of them. And then, she goes to work at Vogue. So she's like, if you think about this, she's the successful intern, right? She's the one who gets the job. And as you might have expected from this reality TV trajectory. And then, I think Into the Gloss is the sort of the launch of that is obviously a big moment. Into the Gloss also kind of importantly starts moving off of the blogosphere specifically and into the YouTube space. So they start doing Get Ready With Me videos, which are really popular on YouTube. And they do them with a host of different kind of influencers, and also just some regular people like college students or, just sort of really kind of thinking broadly about the brand. I think this is actually pretty significant because, most of the big brands like Vogue does tons of these Get Ready With Me videos now. They were kind of early to this trend of brands doing them. So of thinking about, what are people doing on the internet that we can kind of leverage into something that could be branded content, but also be searchable as a Get Ready With Me, for example, in YouTube for somebody who would be looking for that kind of content or following that content. Of course, in 2014, you have the launch. I think in terms of moments where I see some pretty significant impact in terms of influencer partnerships, I think they do a partnership with Paloma, the model, around 2017. She does a Get Ready With Me video that's really good. And then she does the campaign for Body Hero, which is this sort of body oil moisturizing product that they do, which is one of the sort of bigger, more attention-grabbing media campaigns that they do. It has some relationship to Dove's Real Beauty campaign in the sense that it's like, sort of naked women of lots of different body types. They do billboards where the Body Hero is done in the Supreme logo kind of over, breasts, basically. And it's, they put it up on billboards all around New York City and Los Angeles. And that feels like a big moment where they're kind of, Paloma is now more famous than she was at that time. She was kind of, rising in her status. And that felt like a moment where they were kind of thinking very broadly about, what to do with an influence, kind of someone who was kind of on the cusp of like influencer and more conventional kind of fame. And I think she felt like a important partnership for them in the sense that they were really trying to position themselves in the kind of like inclusive body positive space. And that was a good partnership for them in terms of trying to capture brand ethos. The Body Hero campaign has remained kind of an interesting one for them. So in 2022, they partnered with the WNBA. So the WNBA is now the partner on the Body Hero brand. And they do Get Ready With Me videos with like WNBA players. So, there's, again, maintains this sort of sense of thinking very broadly within that particular product. They have started doing, I think, really more conventional brand partnerships in recent years. So in 2022, they did a capsule collection with Olivia Rodrigo, who's like their first true sort of brand ambassador. It was like this lavender makeup bag with a lavender compact. So actually a move away from the pink, right, to the sort of lavender, still in the pastel register. We're not going too far, but a slightly different kind of brand aesthetic. And I think Rodrigo is also an interesting partner for them, in terms of thinking about a brand built on the internet. Because obviously, like Driver's License is one of the, one more important sort of viral songs of the TikTok boom, right? This way that, she also has been able to leverage sort of social media as part of building her personal brand, which I think is a big part of what Glossier does.
Well, one thing,
also, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I don't mean to interrupt you, but you mentioned TikTok, and I think it's an interesting opportunity to talk about platforms and using platforms to help cultivate fans and tap into maybe existing fandoms even. But when we're talking about, the beginnings and origins of Glossier, it was stemming from a blog format, a blog audience. I mean, that is very much of that era. I think, we're big readers of blogs. Now they're just so full of advertising, it's impossible to get through them. And they seem like such a great place because you can have long threads of information that gets very detailed versus like a TikTok or Instagram reel where it's, a few, 30 seconds or whatever it is. So there's quite a difference in how and what you can use. But there's another brand out there called Monday Swimwear that I've been following. They started out as a swimwear blog that has now leveraged stuff into a pretty big swimwear brand, and they have a similar, I think, pathway in some ways to Glossier. There's some overlap there. But I'm curious, when we think about platforms, where do you see that going? And I know it's hard to like predict the future, and I'm almost asking you to predict the future here. But as blogs are becoming less of like a mainstay, and we're going for like shorter bits of content, I'm curious to where you think those opportunities are to like really tap into something and build a brand off of, because you hear about brands building or at least getting a big lift from TikTok, but I don't know how much of a relationship you can build with your customers and something like that. And as you were pointing out, the comment section is such a huge part of the community inside of a blog, which doesn't necessarily always translate over to social. Some platforms it does, others it does not, right?
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts there?
I mean, I think we are in a really interesting kind of transitional moment. I think if you look at something like Glossier or Monday Swimwear, right, they came up in a moment where the market was less oversaturated than it is now, right?
Yeah.
Glossier was doing something like 100 million. Into the Gloss was doing something like 100 million unique page views a month at one point.
It's incredible.
That's just impossible now. I just don't think there's any way for somebody. We're in a different internet moment. It's just not. It's not possible to leverage audience in that manner. In fact, I've seen a lot of bloggers in the sort of OG bloggers in the fashion space have sort of quit blogging in the last couple of years, right? Because it's just become kind of impossible to monetize and to kind of hold audience in the way that they used to. And I do think that the issues that you just described with TikTok are very real. I mean, you have to contend with the algorithm, which means like at some level it's easier to go viral, but it's much harder to maintain audience because you're sort of fighting the algorithm. You're talking about very short form media, which is, again, it's more difficult for people to emotionally resonate with short form media, I think. It's harder to build that relationship. And I also think that, part of the pleasure, I think, for people of TikTok is that it's sort of so quick and so there's so much, and
and you don't have to make the decision. It's just kind of like on autopilot,
right? Yeah. You're not like deciding to go to this place and spend a lot of time there. That's not the pleasure of that. And certainly, I do think you're correct. I mean, brands certainly have viral moments with TikTok, or they're able to build audience, or but how can you maintain audience, I think, is a real question there. And I guess, I'm not sure what the next thing is, I have to tell you. Like my students, where I feel like always on, ready for the next thing, know what the next thing is. Their favorite new thing is Be Real, which I don't really see how you're going to leverage into. I don't really see how brands are going to be able to leverage Be Real into something at this moment. But I may be very wrong on that, and we'll be laughing at me in 2 years.
What's the age group of your students? I wonder how that plays into.
They're like 18 to 22.
Okay.
And they seem to really, just in terms of thinking about what they seem to be like into right now in terms of what social media can do, they're very ad skeptical. They like TikTok because once they spend the time kind of cooking their algorithm, they're able to get kind of exactly what they want or a lot of what they want, right? So they're being fed content that is, they feel is really designed for them. But of course, it's quite narrow casted, right? Like, it's not like they're not watching the same things, right? They're watching these very specific things, which I think is also hard for brands. And then, they do seem to like these platforms that have, like, Be Real has this very specific temporality about it, right? You get your daily notification, you take your picture, you're done, right? It has a very, like, economical labor about it. In some ways it feels a little bit sort of, like a slow internet kind of object, right? Where you're just, instead of sort of overthinking the aesthetic, you're just doing, whatever
I
you're
love
doing
that simplicity, though. I can appreciate that.
I absolutely can.
Yeah.
But I guess I wonder, like, that pushback seems like it's a challenge for brands, right? Because if what people are looking for then is something that's a little bit slower or a little bit more just your friends or something, that's a hard place to leverage. I do think that, like, there does seem to be a great deal of pushback about how much advertising there is on Instagram specifically. And I think that, obviously I understand why Instagram, the company, has done that. But I do think it's probably not helping the influencer space, in the sense that I think people are frustrated. They can't even see the things that they want to be following, right? And I think, I hear a lot of people talking about that. They don't see what they want to see on that platform. I guess in some ways a push towards a more slow internet might be, maybe it'll revert back to, like, a blogosphere style thing.
I'm for it. I enjoy it. Maybe that's just, that was like when I got really focused and into the internet. So maybe it's more nostalgic for me.
Yeah.
But what I think is,
yeah, sorry, go ahead. Yeah,
no,
go ahead.
What I think is interesting is how the Into the Gloss really help, I think, hone in product development for the brand by focusing in on, like, and learning where those key, like, fan driven products were, or, like, whether it's because they're just aspirational and they're just at a high cost point, or because they really do work. She was able to get a lot of information out to fuel her own product development. And you talk a little bit about that and in this piece. And what I find interesting is that she did it in a way that she wasn't making, like, knockoffs. She maintained the brand integrity while providing an alternative. I would love you to talk a little bit about that, but I feel like I'm not doing a very good job of digging into it there.
Sure, I'm happy to talk about that. I think it's one of the things that she did really, really well, that Emily Weiss did really well, and her team. They had, of course, like 4 years of Into the Gloss, to, comments and, data about, which articles were being clicked on the most, which products were being clicked on, right? To go through and to really imagine, what basically do market research of their audience and imagine what the audience wanted. And the piece that you're referencing, I talk a bit about a product that had a real cult appeal that was being pushed in part by Into the Gloss and the top shelf. So over and over again in these top shelf pieces, which were, I will say, a lot of the top shelves, as compared to maybe something you might see on YouTube, the top shelves were often being done by people who were fairly affluent, right? So they were people who worked in the beauty and fashion spaces, or celebrities in a lot of cases, or it girls, if you will, who had access to products that maybe regular folks, like, didn't and couldn't afford, which was part of the pleasure, of course, of the site, was that sort of aspirational element. But they, this one product kept coming up over and over again, this Biologique Recherche P50, which is like a acid serum. And at the time it was only available at, like, one retailer in America, but it just kept coming up as like the thing that you needed to, fix your face problems. It was going to solve it. And it was expensive. It was like, it was out of the price point for the average person, I would say. I think at that time, at that point, it retailed for about $70 a bottle. And, but one of the things that started to happen on Into the Gloss was that cults started to occur around particular types of products. So these exfoliating toner products like P50, serums that were hyaluronic acid or glycolic acid, or lactic acid, all of which are now very popular within the beauty marketplace, but at that time were fairly kind of new to the average consumer. And serums that had these products in them were also fairly pricey. There has been some innovation in that marketplace. Like it's a company like The Ordinary, I think, is a really important company in terms of thinking about making like serums accessible to large numbers of people. Their price point is very low. It's like $6 a serum. I mean,
oh wow.
Yeah. But and they're like in Target. But so she, there was these sort of cults around these products. So one of the things that she did with the brand was to develop versions of these products that had these sort of cult appeals. So they did a kind of exfoliating toner called The Solution. The hyaluronic acid serum is called Bounce. So they branded them in these sort of fun ways. And I think priced them low. Like I think I just bought a Bounce serum a few weeks ago. I think it was like $27 or something. I mean, not cheap, but not like insanely expensive either, right? But when she did, so we might call these like dupe style products to some extent, right? Like products that are versions of something else that is more higher end. But what Glossier did was they made these products seem like luxury items. So the price point might be accessible, particularly to this young audience they were chasing, people in their teens or their 20s who probably didn't have tons of disposable income to spend on, expensive skincare products, but wanted them. But they made them seem covetable, right? So, if the products, as I said, when you got the package in the mail, it felt really fun and fancy. When you go into a Glossier store, and they now have a lot of brick and mortar retail locations in major cities in the US, there are these sort of incredibly sort of minimalist pink and red and aqua stores with beautiful mirrors and these like minimalist counters. And I think the minimalism is important because minimalism is kind of as a retail aesthetic is associated with more high-end brands.
Yeah, definitely.
As you move down in the cost sector, you typically get more clutter. I'm sorry, in the shelf. So, the kind of minimalist presentation. A lot of staff in the store. So again, that feeling that you're being, kind of talked to and, and I think that really was the branding of the product, the aesthetic of it was really important to maintaining that sense of like, this is a luxurious item. This is special. This is chic. It's hip, and hip, I think, was a big part of it, right? That it was hip. And this is not unusual in the beauty space. Most luxury brands, Gucci, Chanel, Dior, make a lot of their money in the perfume and beauty sectors by selling the sort of idea of luxury in a cheaper package through these products. They're moving a lot more perfume than they are, handbags, which are at a much higher price point. But they're able to do that by maintaining the sheen of luxury, which is, I think, what Glossier was able to do. You were going to Glossier because you wanted to go to Glossier, not because you had to go to Glossier. I think that's kind of an important distinction.
Yes, I was going to ask you too if you have actually purchased and used Glossier. You already answered it. It sounds like you bought in.
I have.
Yeah, and
I bought in. Yeah. I like Bounce. I feel like an ad. I like the hyaluronic acid serum. I think it's a nice serum. It works really well for the price point. I like the Perfecting Skin Tints. I will confess that I've actually like bought more products recently from Violette, who was somebody that was kind of an early feature on Into the Gloss, who now has a line.
Oh, interesting.
It was like this kind of like, Glossier sort of diaspora, if you will.
And what drew you to that? Was the influencer? Did it their endorsement that helped your decision making?
So she has a line of products, and she's made YouTubes for years that are very popular and has a popular Instagram. I always liked her YouTubes. I thought they were kind of very fun. Mm-hmm. I mean, she's kind of trying to distill like French girl beauty into a brand. I would say like Glossier products, there are some products that are like hyper pigmented in the Glossier line, but not that many because it has that sort of natural beauty aesthetic. Violette has a lot of products that are like hyper pigmented. So she's like bright red lipstick that has been very popular, across the beauty space in the last couple of years. And I think, it depends on, I think, your kind of interest in, what kind of makeup you want. I mean, that's, has some skincare products is a little bit smaller line than Glossier's is at this point. But I think in general, both of those lines actually speak to something that is interesting, which is I think there's a lot of potential still in the beauty sector for, direct to consumer brands that come from kind of influencer models. Because I think beauty is quite intimate. I think younger consumers are not going to walk into like a Macy's and walk around the cosmetics counter and, talk to the sales people. It's just not how they want to shop. It's not how they're accustomed to living their life even. Sephora is always packed and people seem to enjoy the play sort of possibilities of walking around Sephora and trying things on. But Sephora has a floor space problem, and most of their brands aren't even on the floor. It's actually very hard to get a brand on the floor at Sephora, which speaks to Glossier's positionality. They were able to get one in 2022, or 2023. They just launched this year, and they, I think the endorsement of somebody that people trust in this space is kind of important, right? I mean, people.
That's where I was going to go with the trust, right? Because you walk around a Macy's. I mean, I don't know if you would necessarily just immediately, you have to build that relationship with your salesperson before you can, take a recommendation from them, or in a very superficial way, how do they look? Does their skin look good? Does their makeup look good? You're going to be judging, right. I think, trying to like find a proof point to like, okay, they know what they're talking about. Where, if you're seeing these people on your screen every day, every time you open it, a lot of the groundwork's already been done for you. And what I find about interest, I've been into Sephora, I've been in the Ulta. I've been I've been into these stores, and I think one of the challenges also of having like a retail operations, having the EQ levels of a sales associate being able to like walk you through, put things on your face. As you said, it's a very intimate experience, and something that might be a little awkward and uncomfortable for most people if you don't have like that salesperson who really can read body language, knows how to like loosen people up, get them to feel comfortable. There's a big brand challenge there for getting around that. So I can see where the influencer side of it makes sense, especially from a leading into their own brand. I mean, we're seeing it now. It's something I think we haven't necessarily, we've seen it before, like celebrity yoga brands or whatever, but now I think it's becoming, they had celebrityism, or they were on TV, or they were music stars or whatever before. Now we have people who are just known for being who they are on the internet, owning brands and turning that into a brand, which I think is really fascinating, in an interesting space. And I'm curious to where, who you're following, who you think is doing a great job of that.
Oh, wow. That's an interesting question. I think you're absolutely right. I think the influencer space has this emotional register that's very different from conventional celebrity, or even, from salespeople in a store. And people do follow influencers who they feel like are registering for them, right? They look like how they want to look, or they have an aesthetic that they want to emulate, and they're sort of curating via that, and that is helpful for selling products. In terms of people I'm following, like I said, I like Violette a lot. I love Katie Storino. I don't know if you know who she is. She has Mega Babe.
Okay.
Katie Storino is she's also kind of a body positive influencer, and she has a line. It's in Target, it's in Ulta. It's called Mega Babe. It's like deodorants, and she has like bust dust. It's like under boob powder. It's all very well branded. She has like this anti-chafe stick that has I can't remember what it's called, Thigh Rescue. And she's like very funny, and does really good.
But with those topics, you would have to have a sense of humor, right? I mean, if you're going to, they're also kind of niche. They're not necessarily like something you're going to see in back when magazines were it, but flipping through a magazine, you're not really going to see an ad for that typically, right?
No, she does these underwear fit tests, like for brands, where she does these, like she calls it a roll test, where she like kind of like launches over, and if the underwear rolls down, that's a bad thing. But you would never see that, in any other context, and it's very funny, but also very, very sort of charming and helpful, right? Like like, oh, if I was going to order this, is this actually?
Well, it definitely hits that authenticity mark that you noted earlier. And I think that's a lot of what we're talking about here, as far as like trustworthiness, and taking it back to like, what is it? Why are they trustworthy? It's that authenticity of not acting, right? I mean, if you're always going to be acting, and there's always going to be that sort of a mask, more or less, when you're on social media, but those who can do it in a way that's, I think, still true to who they are and what they're about, and that brand ethos, seem to be doing really well.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think a lot of people think that being an influencer is maybe sort of easy, but it isn't, because I think in order to really develop your relationship with your audience, you have to be, like, to some extent, you have to cultivate some sort of intimacy with them. And that often is the kind of rawness, or it's something that you wouldn't normally show. Now, a lot of influencers kind of burn out, because what happens then is that, people start sort of emotionally registering back to them in ways that are often really challenging, that they're ill-equipped for. But I think, this is a really different type of celebrity than we've seen in the past. It's people who are famous for, who they are themselves, which, reality TV kind of breaks the barrier on that, but influencer culture really expands it. And it also, has this sort of sense of a relational sense that's quite different than conventional celebrities. Like, I follow like Beyonce on social media. Thousands of people respond to every one of her posts, but Beyonce doesn't follow anybody, not even Jay-Z. And she doesn't respond to things people say in the comments. Like, that's not part of her engagement. When you start coming down into the sort of influencer or micro celebrity sector, you do start to see follower following ratios that tick up a little bit. I mean, not like the way regular people's ratios are, but you see that they're also following people. And often they're interacting, in the comments or in the DMs with their audience, which, I follow some fashion influencers. Like I really like Maxi Green, and if somebody asks what she's wearing, she's gonna respond to it in the comments, which makes people feel like they are in a relationship with her in some capacity. Or if she's having kind of a rough week, she's gonna do a story about what's going on in her life. in a way that we wouldn't necessarily expect from someone in a more traditional celebrity position.
Mm-hmm. Well, Elizabeth, I hate to say this, but we're getting close on time. But okay. I enjoyed the conversation. I loved it. I love this piece. For people who want to search it out, where can they find that?
So this piece on it's called Into the Glow, and it's on flowtv.org, which is hosted by the University of Texas at Austin. You can also just like Google my name, I think, with Glossier, and it'll come up pretty easily if you need to.
Cool. I also will link to it in the comments, or in the show notes for folks. But thank you so much for joining us, and I would love to keep the conversation going and keep reading all the great work you're doing.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening into the Fan Lab. We hope you've enjoyed our deep dive into the cultivating world of fandom, and as we continue to explore it, we invite you to take the next step with us. Head on over to our website and download our newest report, Decoding Fandom. It's full of insights and case studies telling the story of how fandom can create long-term value for brands. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and stay tuned to our next episode.